The distant horizon shimmered like a mirage as Lillian Prescott's knees finally buckled beneath her, the relentless Arizona sun showing no mercy to those who dared travel its unforgiving terrain alone. Her final conscious thought was of the weathered fence post her trembling fingers clutched as the world tilted sideways and darkness claimed her. Samuel Blackwood had seen plenty of strange things in his 32 years working the Double Creek Ranch, but finding a well-dressed woman collapsed beside his property fence in the middle of June 1879 was something entirely new. He'd been mending the eastern perimeter when he spotted her, a heap of dusty blue fabric and copper-colored hair sprawled motionless against the sun-bleached wood. "Good Lord," he muttered, dropping his tools and rushing to her side. Her skin burned hot beneath his calloused fingers as he checked for a pulse. Relief washed over him when he found it weak but steady. Without hesitation, he gathered her limp form into his arms, surprised by how little she weighed despite the elaborate traveling dress and petticoats. "Hold on there, miss," he said, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Let's get you out of this heat." The walk back to his cabin felt longer than usual with his unexpected burden. Samuel's mind raced with questions. What was a lady like this doing all alone in this stretch of nowhere? The nearest town, Copper Springs, was 15 miles east, and the stagecoach route didn't come anywhere near his property. Inside his modest cabin, he gently laid her on his bed, then quickly fetched water from the barrel on the porch. He dampened a clean cloth and placed it on her forehead, then carefully lifted her head to help her drink. Most of the water spilled down her chin, but she swallowed some reflexively. "Come on now," he coaxed, his voice gentler than most would recognize. "Take a little more." For nearly an hour, Samuel tended to the unconscious woman, alternating between cooling her fevered skin and trying to get water past her lips. Finally, her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. Confusion and fear crossed her features as she focused on his face. "Who?" she croaked, her voice breaking. "Samuel Blackwood, madam. Found you passed out by my fence. You're safe now." She tried to sit up but fell back with a groan. "Water, please." He helped her drink properly this time, supporting her shoulders as she gulped greedily. "Slow down there," he cautioned. "Too much too fast will make you sick." When she had enough, Samuel eased her back against the pillow. "Mind telling me your name and how you came to be dying of thirst on my property?" "Lillian Prescott," she replied, her voice stronger now. "I was traveling to Copper Springs. The driver of my hired wagon had to stop for a repair, and I thought I saw a homestead in the distance. I decided to walk ahead while he fixed the wheel, but I must have misjudged the distance." Samuel frowned. "That was mighty foolish, Miss Prescott. The desert ain't kind to those who don't respect it." "Mrs.," she corrected automatically, then something like grief flashed across her face. "Though I suppose it's Miss again now." The implication wasn't lost on Samuel. A widow, then. He nodded respectfully but didn't pry. "Your driver, he'll be looking for you," Samuel said, moving to the window to scan the horizon. "If he's even noticed I'm gone," Lillian said bitterly. He seemed more concerned with his flask than his passenger. Samuel's jaw tightened. "That's so? Well, you're welcome to rest here until you're strong enough to travel. I can take you into town myself when you're ready." "You're very kind, Mr. Blackwood. I've imposed terribly already." "Samuel," he corrected, "and it's no imposition. Can't very well leave a lady to the vultures, can I?" The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I suppose not." As evening approached, Samuel prepared a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and coffee. Lillian had drifted in and out of sleep throughout the afternoon, her body recovering from the ordeal. When the aroma of food filled the cabin, she awoke fully. "Can you sit up for supper?" Samuel asked, bringing a plate to the bedside. Lillian nodded, gingerly pushing herself upright. "I believe so, thank you." He watched as she took tentative bites, color gradually returning to her cheeks. Her manners were refined, confirming his initial impression that she came from genteel society. It made her presence here all the more puzzling. "Tomorrow I'll ride out and see if I can find any sign of your driver," Samuel offered. "Though if he was drinking as you say, he might have moved on without you." "I wouldn't be surprised," Lillian said, setting down her fork. The man was recommended by the hotel in Tucson, but I suspect his references were as fabricated as his sobriety. Samuel leaned against the rough-hewn table. What business brings you to Copper Springs, if you don't mind my asking? It's not exactly a destination for ladies traveling alone. Lillian's fingers twisted the simple gold band she still wore. My late husband's brother lives there. After James died, he wrote offering me a place to stay while I figure out what comes next. Her voice faltered. The banking house where James worked paid a small widow's benefit, but it wasn't enough to maintain our home in Boston. I'm sorry for your loss, Samuel said sincerely. When did he pass? 4 months ago, pneumonia. Her eyes grew distant. It happened so quickly. He was fine one day, feverish the next, and gone within a week. Samuel nodded solemnly. He understood sudden loss all too well. Rest now. We'll sort everything out in the morning. That night, Samuel made a pallet for himself on the floor near the fireplace, giving Lillian privacy in the only bed. As he listened to her soft breathing across the darkened cabin, he pondered the strange turn his solitary life had taken in a single day. At dawn, Samuel rose quietly, not wanting to disturb his guest. He left a note explaining he'd gone to look for her driver and slipped out to saddle his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Hawk. The morning air held a brief coolness that would vanish once the sun climbed higher. Samuel rode the perimeter of his property, following the fence line where he'd found Lillian. About 2 miles east, he discovered wagon tracks veering north, away from the direction of Copper Springs. Frowning, he followed them until they met up with the main trail headed toward Tucson. It appeared the driver had indeed abandoned his passenger. Samuel's opinion of the man, already low, sank further. Returning to the cabin, he found Lillian awake and attempting to tidy up, though she still moved with obvious weakness. "You shouldn't be up," he admonished gently. She straightened, pushing a strand of copper hair from her face. "I've imposed enough without being completely useless." "Found your wagon tracks," Samuel said, removing his hat. "Looks like your driver headed back to Tucson." Lillian closed her eyes briefly. "I paid him half in advance. The rest was due upon arrival in Copper Springs." She gave a humorless laugh. "I suppose he decided the remainder wasn't worth the trouble. Do you have funds for another driver?" Samuel asked carefully, not wanting to embarrass her. "Some," she admitted. "Though less than I'd like for starting over." Samuel considered the situation. "I need to ride into town in 3 days for supplies. You're welcome to accompany me then if you're feeling strong enough." Relief washed over her face. "That would be most appreciated. I'll compensate you, of course." "No need," he replied firmly. "It's on my way." The next 3 days established an unexpected domestic rhythm. Lillian insisted on helping with cooking and mending once she regained her strength. Samuel found himself enjoying the company, though he'd grown accustomed to solitude in the 7 years since his wife's death. Lillian proved to be well-educated and quick-witted, sharing stories of her life in Boston as they worked. Samuel learned she had taught at girls' school before her marriage and had no children of her own. He, in turn, told her about his cattle operation and how he'd built the ranch from nothing after coming west following the war. "Were you a soldier?" Lillian asked on the second evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in fiery hues. Samuel nodded. "Union cavalry. Came home to Tennessee to find my family's farm in ruins. Decided there was nothing keeping me there anymore." "Is that when your wife passed?" Lillian asked softly, surprising him with her perception. "No," he replied after a moment. "Martha came west with me. We had 10 good years here before typhoid took her." He cleared his throat. "That was 7 years ago." Lillian's hand rested briefly on his forearm. "I'm sorry." "It must have been difficult to continue alone." "It was," he admitted. "Still is sometimes, but a man finds ways to keep going." The morning they were to leave for town, Samuel brought out one of Martha's old riding outfits for Lillian. Her traveling dress, though partially cleaned, was impractical for horseback. "I hope you don't mind," he said awkwardly, presenting the clothes. "They're simpler than what you're used to, but they'll be more comfortable for the ride." Lillian accepted the bundle, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. This is very thoughtful." She emerged from the cabin some time later wearing the split riding skirt and cotton blouse. Samuel had worried they might not fit as Martha had been taller, but Lillian had managed to make adjustments. The sight of another woman in his late wife's clothes stirred complicated emotions he hadn't anticipated. "Will this do?" Lillian asked, noticing his expression. Samuel nodded, pushing away the memories. "Just fine, ever ridden astride before?" "A few times, though it's been years," she admitted. "Daisy here is gentle as they come," he said, patting the dappled mare he'd saddled for her. "She'll treat you right." The journey to Copper Springs took most of the day. Samuel kept a careful eye on Lillian, making sure she wasn't overtaxing herself. Though initially hesitant on horseback, she quickly regained confidence, sitting straighter in the saddle as the miles passed. "You're a natural," he remarked during a brief rest stop. Lillian smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "My father believed all proper young ladies should know how to ride. My mother was scandalized." The town came into view by mid-afternoon, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the main road, with a church steeple rising above the rest. Unlike many frontier settlements, Copper Springs had an orderly appearance owing to the prosperity brought by the nearby mines. "Where does your brother-in-law live?" Samuel asked as they rode down the main street, Norwood Street according to his letters. He manages the assay office. Samuel nodded. "William Prescott, I know him by reputation, honest man from what I hear." Relief crossed Lillian's features. "That's comforting. We've never actually met. He and James weren't close, different mothers, but he wrote such kind letters after the funeral." They found the house easily enough, a tidy two-story residence with a small garden out front. Samuel helped Lillian dismount, conscious of how reluctant he felt to complete this errand. These few days with her had awakened something he'd thought long buried. "Thank you," Lillian said earnestly, looking up at him. "Not just for the ride, but for everything. You saved my life, Mr. Blackwood." "Samuel," he reminded her with a small smile. Before she could respond, the front door opened and a man stepped onto the porch. "Lillian, is that you?" "We've been so worried." William Prescott hurried down the steps, a portly, middle-aged man with thinning hair and James's same blue eyes. He embraced Lillian warmly. "When you didn't arrive on schedule, I sent inquiries to Tucson," he explained. "They said you'd departed 3 days ago." "My driver abandoned me," Lillian explained. "If not for Mr. Blackwood here, I might not have survived." William turned to Samuel with genuine gratitude. "Sir, I cannot thank you enough. Please, won't you come inside? My wife has just prepared tea." Samuel hesitated, glancing at Lillian. Something unspoken passed between them, a reluctance to part so abruptly after the connection they'd formed. "I have supplies to purchase," Samuel said, "but perhaps I could return afterward to ensure Mrs. Prescott is settled properly." "Please do," William insisted. "In fact, you must stay for supper. It's the least we can offer for your heroism." Samuel tipped his hat. "Much obliged. I'll return in an hour or so." As he walked away, leading both horses, Samuel felt Lillian's gaze following him. He hadn't planned on staying in town overnight, but suddenly, the long ride home in the dark seemed less appealing than it had before. Samuel completed his errands efficiently, purchasing supplies and arranging for them to be delivered to his ranch later that week. At the general store, he found himself lingering over a display of hair ribbons, something he hadn't noticed in years. On impulse, he selected a blue one that reminded him of the hints of color in Lillian's gray eyes. "Gift for someone special?" the shopkeeper's wife asked with a knowing smile. Samuel felt warmth creep up his neck. "Just being neighborly," he muttered, adding it to his purchases. When he returned to the Prescott residence, the atmosphere inside was tense despite the welcoming facade. William's wife, Harriet, was a thin, nervous woman who seemed determined to maintain appearances while clearly disapproving of something. Lillian had changed into a borrowed dress that hung awkwardly on her frame, and her smile seemed forced. "Mr. Blackwood, welcome back," William greeted him heartily, too heartily. "We were just discussing Lillian's options." Over a stilted dinner, the situation became clearer. The place to stay William had offered was actually a position as governess to his 4 children, not the family welcome Lillian had expected. Furthermore, he seemed uncomfortable with her story of being rescued by a bachelor rancher. "Quite fortunate, Mr. Blackwood found you," William said with a tight smile. though I imagine the situation must have been compromising. Samuel saw Lillian's knuckles whiten around her fork. Mr. Blackwood behaved with perfect propriety, she said evenly. He saved my life at considerable inconvenience to himself. Of course, William backpedaled. I merely meant that appearances must be considered, especially now that you're in my household. As James's brother, your reputation reflects on our family. Samuel set down his napkin. Mrs. Prescott was never in any danger of having her reputation compromised under my roof, sir. Naturally, William said, though his tone suggested otherwise. After dinner, Samuel found himself alone with Lillian in the small garden while William dealt with a fussing child upstairs. I apologize for my brother-in-law, Lillian said quietly. He means well, but he's worried about appearances, Samuel finished for her. She nodded, looking down at her borrowed dress. I misunderstood his offer. I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. What will you do now? Samuel asked. Accept the position, I suppose. 4 children will be a handful, but I've taught before. The pay is modest, but I'll have room and board. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's more than many widows can expect. Samuel wanted to offer an alternative, but hesitated. They'd known each other only a few days, after all. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the ribbon. Bought this in town, he said gruffly, holding it out to her. Thought it might suit you. Lillian took the ribbon, her fingers brushing his. It's lovely, thank you. I should be going, Samuel said reluctantly. It's a long ride back. You're not staying in town. Hadn't planned to. Lillian stepped closer. Please be careful on the ride home and know that I'll never forget your kindness. For a moment, Samuel thought she might embrace him, but William's voice called from the house, breaking the moment. Lillian, where are you? The children are asking for a bedtime story. She stepped back, the ribbon clutched in her hand. Goodbye, Samuel Blackwood. God bless you for what you did. Samuel rode home in darkness, his thoughts as vast and scattered as the stars overhead. The cabin felt emptier than it had in years when he returned, though Lillian had only occupied it for 3 days. He told himself this hollow feeling would pass, as it had after Martha. Life on the frontier didn't leave room for dwelling on might-have-beens. Yet as days passed, he found himself thinking of Lillian constantly, her quiet strength, her gentle humor, the way sunlight caught in her copper hair. Twice he saddled up with the intention of riding to town on some invented errand, and twice he unsaddled again, telling himself he was being foolish. Nearly 3 weeks after leaving Lillian in Copper Springs, Samuel was repairing his corral when he spotted a rider approaching from the east. The figure was too small for most men, and as they drew closer, he recognized the dappled mare he'd lent to Lillian for their journey to town. His heart hammered as he shaded his eyes against the sun. It was indeed Lillian, wearing Martha's old riding clothes, her hair tied back with the blue ribbon he'd given her. Samuel dropped his tools and walked out to meet her, confusion and hope warring within him. She reined in Daisy and looked down at him, her expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty. Miss Prescott, he said, unable to keep the pleasure from his voice. This is unexpected. I've left my position with the Prescotts, she announced without preamble. It was untenable. Samuel helped her dismount. What happened? William expected more than a governess, she said, her cheeks coloring. When I refused his advances, he suggested I'd already compromised myself by staying with you, so what difference did it make? Anger flared in Samuel's chest. That snake. No, Lillian interrupted firmly. That's not why I'm here. I left because I realized something during these weeks apart. She took a deep breath. I've spent my life doing what was expected of me, the proper Boston daughter, the dutiful wife, the grateful widow. For once, I want to choose my own path. Samuel watched her intently, hardly daring to hope. And what path might that be? I don't know yet, she admitted, but I know it doesn't lie in Copper Springs. She met his gaze directly. I came to return your horse and to ask if you might know of any respectable positions in the area. I have some savings and I'm willing to work hard. It wasn't quite what he'd hoped for, but Samuel nodded. You could stay here while you look, he offered, then hastily added, I'd make up a proper room in the storage lean-to, everything above board. A smile touched her lips. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose again. It's no imposition, he insisted. Truth is, the place felt mighty empty after you left. Something flickered in her eyes at his words. Did it? Samuel cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. Miss Prescott, Lillian, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. I'm not one for flowery words, but I'd be honored if you'd consider staying, not just temporarily. Lillian's eyes widened. Are you proposing? Poorly, it seems, Samuel said with a self-deprecating smile. I'm asking if you might consider a life here with me, not right away, of course. We could have a proper courtship first, if you'd like. For a terrible moment she was silent, and Samuel feared he'd overstepped. Then a radiant smile broke across her face. I thought about you every day, she confessed. About how peaceful I felt here, despite the circumstances. How seen I felt when you looked at me. She took a step closer. I rode out here hoping you might suggest exactly this, though I scarcely dared believe you would. Samuel's heart soared. Is that a yes? It's a yes to courting, she clarified, though her eyes shone with promise. The rest, I think, will follow naturally if it's meant to be. He wanted to pull her into his arms, but restrained himself. I'll court you proper then, starting with getting you settled in your own quarters, no matter how much I might wish otherwise. Lillian laughed, the sound carrying across the open ranch yard. Samuel Blackwood, I do believe you're going to be good for me. I aim to be, he promised. Over the following weeks, Samuel and Lillian established a new rhythm to their days. True to his word, he converted the storage lean-to into a small but comfortable room for her, with a proper door for privacy. During the days, they worked side by side, Lillian taking over the household tasks while learning about ranch operations, Samuel teaching her about desert survival and cattle raising. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset, gradually sharing more of their histories. Samuel told her about his childhood in Tennessee, his experiences in the war, and how he and Martha had struggled during those first difficult years establishing the ranch. Lillian spoke of her strict upbringing in Boston society, her brief happiness teaching before societal expectations pushed her toward marriage, and her complicated feelings about her years with James. He wasn't unkind, she explained one evening as they shelled peas together. But there was always a distance between us. I think we both married because it was expected, not because of any great passion. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Martha and I were different that way. We grew up neighboring farms, always knew we'd end up together. He smiled at the memory. But I've learned there's more than one way to build a life with someone. Sometimes the slower growing affections prove the strongest. Lillian's eyes met his. I believe you're right. As summer gave way to fall, their courtship deepened. Samuel began taking Lillian on proper outings, picnics in the foothills, a church social in a neighboring settlement, even a trip to Tucson where he proudly introduced her to his business associates. For her part, Lillian transformed the Spartan cabin with small touches, curtains sewn from fabric purchased in town, wildflowers arranged in jars, and eventually a small vegetable garden she coaxed from the reluctant soil. Their first kiss came on a crisp October evening beneath a canopy of stars. They had ridden to Samuel's favorite spot on the property, a small mesa overlooking the valley, to watch a meteor shower. Wrapped in blankets against the desert night's chill, Lillian gasped with delight as streaks of light painted the heavens. I've never seen anything so beautiful, she whispered. Samuel turned to her, the starlight reflecting in her eyes. I have. When he leaned toward her, she met him halfway, her lips soft and yielding against his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with months of restrained longing. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. I'm falling in love with you, Lillian Prescott, Samuel admitted, his voice rough with emotion. She touched his face tenderly. I believe I'm already there, Samuel Blackwood. By Christmas, their courtship had progressed to the point where propriety was becoming a daily struggle. The separate quarters, once a necessary gesture of respect, now felt like an arbitrary barrier. After Christmas dinner, as they sat before the fire exchanging modest gifts, Samuel finally asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. Lillian, he began, taking her hands in his. These past months have been the happiest I've known in years. I find myself wanting to build a future with you, not just sharing work and meals, but sharing a life completely. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. Will you marry me, become my wife and partner in all things?" Tears glistened in Lillian's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Samuel, nothing would make me happier." They were married on New Year's Day 1880 by the circuit preacher, with a small gathering of neighboring ranchers as witnesses. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, held in their cabin adorned with pine boughs and winter berries Lillian had gathered. She wore a new dress of deep blue wool, with Samuel's ribbon in her hair. As they spoke their vows, Samuel marveled at how much his life had changed in just half a year. The woman who had collapsed at his fence line in desperate need now stood before him as his equal and partner, strong and confident in her choice. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other with a mixture of tenderness and passion that surpassed anything either had known before. Their previous marriages, while not unhappy, had lacked the deep connection they now shared built on choice, mutual respect, and genuine love rather than obligation or expectation. "I never imagined I could feel this way," Lillian confessed, her head resting on Samuel's chest as dawn approached. "Like I've found the place I truly belong," Samuel kissed her forehead. "You belong here with me for as long as we both shall live." Spring brought new beginnings to the ranch. The cattle herd increased with a successful calving season, and Samuel secured a favorable contract with the Army for beef supply. With the additional income, they began expanding the cabin, adding a proper second bedroom and enlarging the main living area, planning for the future. Lillian asked with a smile as Samuel reviewed the construction plans at the kitchen table. He looked up, a question in his eyes. "Is there something you're trying to tell me?" She shook her head, laughing. "Not yet, but I'd like a family someday if we're blessed that way." "I'd like that too," Samuel admitted, "though I'm content with just you if that's how things turn out." As they approached the one-year anniversary of their meeting, Samuel planned a surprise. While Lillian was visiting a neighbor's wife to exchange recipes, he rode to the spot where he'd found her collapsed by the fence. There, he planted a small garden of desert-hardy flowers and erected a bench beneath the shade of a newly constructed ramada. When he brought her there, Lillian was overwhelmed. "You did all this. Thought we should mark the spot properly," Samuel explained. "The place where my life changed forever." Lillian sat on the bench, touching the colorful blooms. "I was so frightened that day. Lost, desperate, sure I was going to die." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I never imagined disaster would lead me to such happiness." Samuel joined her, taking her hand. "Sometimes the best journeys start with a wrong turn." As the years passed, the Double Creek Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Lillian proved to have a head for business, keeping immaculate records and suggesting innovative improvements. She started raising chickens and goats alongside Samuel's cattle operation, diversifying their income. She also began teaching the children of neighboring ranchers 3 days a week, fulfilling her passion for education. In their 3rd year of marriage, Lillian gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Martha Blackwood. 2 years later, twins followed Joseph William and Jonathan Samuel. Their family complete, Samuel and Lillian watched with pride as their children grew strong in the freedom of ranch life, yet with the benefit of their mother's educational background. The harsh realities of frontier life tested them at times, drought years that threatened the herd, a brush with rustlers that left Samuel with a bullet graze on his arm, illness that swept through the region claiming neighbors' lives. Through each challenge, their partnership only strengthened, each crisis weathered together. On the evening of their 20th anniversary, Samuel and Lillian sat on the bench by the fence line, watching the sunset just as they had countless times before. At 52, Samuel's dark hair was now streaked with silver, his face more weathered but his eyes still bright with vitality. Lillian, at 48, remained as beautiful to him as the day he'd found her, though fine lines now framed her eyes and streaks of silver mingled with the copper of her hair. "Do you ever regret it?" Samuel asked, breaking their comfortable silence. "Coming west? Ending up here with an old cowboy instead of back in Boston society?" Lillian turned to him, surprised. "What a question after all these years." She squeezed his hand. "I have never, not for one moment, regretted the path that led me to you." Even the hardest days here have been richer than the easiest days I knew before. Samuel nodded, satisfied. Just checking. And you, she asked. Any regrets about picking up a half-dead stranger and having your peaceful bachelor existence disrupted forever? Only one, he said seriously. Oh. Lillian raised an eyebrow. That I didn't find you sooner. He leaned over to kiss her, still marveling that this remarkable woman had chosen to build a life with him. We could have had even more years together. Lillian rested her head against his shoulder as the last rays of sunlight painted the desert gold. We still have many ahead of us. That we do, Samuel agreed. That we do. From the house came the sound of their children calling them for supper. Grace's authoritative tone, Joseph's deeper voice, Jonathan's infectious laugh. Samuel stood and offered Lillian his hand, just as he had that first day when she awoke in his cabin, disoriented and afraid. Now she took it with the confidence of absolute trust, rising to stand beside the man who had once carried her from death's door into a life neither could have imagined. Together, they walked home across the land they'd nurtured, toward the family they'd created, their shadows stretching long and united behind them in the fading light. 25 years after Lillian collapsed beside that fence in the Arizona heat, she stood in the same spot watching as her daughter Grace's wedding ceremony concluded beneath the now mature Ramada. The desert garden Samuel had planted had expanded over the decades, becoming a renowned oasis of color in the region. The ranch itself had grown into one of the most successful operations in the territory, a testament to their shared vision and hard work. I believe I've just become the happiest father-in-law in Arizona, Samuel murmured, slipping his arm around Lillian's waist as they watched Grace and her new husband, a promising young veterinarian, accept congratulations from the gathered guests. You said the same thing at Joseph's wedding last year, Lillian reminded him with a smile. And I'll say it again when Jonathan finally convinces that schoolteacher to marry him, Samuel replied, a father's prerogative. As the celebration continued into the evening, with lanterns illuminating the festivities and music floating across the property, Samuel led Lillian away from the crowds to their special bench. Though they were both older now, Samuel's hair completely silver, Lillian's figure softened by the years and childbearing, they still moved together with the easy synchronicity of a couple who had shared a lifetime of experiences. Did you ever imagine this? Samuel asked, gesturing toward the sprawling ranch, the gathering of friends and family, the life they'd built together. That day when I found you, Lillian shook her head. I was just hoping to survive until the next morning. The idea that I was at the beginning of the greatest adventure of my life never occurred to me. She took his weathered hand in hers. Thank you for saving me, Samuel Blackwood. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, he replied, the simple truth of it evident in every aspect of their shared life. As twilight settled over the desert they both loved, Samuel and Lillian Blackwood remained on their bench, watching the first stars appear overhead. Their journey together had begun with a desperate moment beside a sun-bleached fence, but it had blossomed into a legacy of love, family, and purpose that would endure long after they were gone, proving that, sometimes, life's most beautiful destinations can only be reached by first losing your way.